Hello everybody, my name is Christian Swenson. I do videos here on YouTube about autism, autistic consciousness, and life on the autism spectrum. Today I want to do another text commentary video because I enjoyed doing the other one so much. This one is about a book I really enjoyed by a nonverbal autistic boy named Tito Rajarshi Mukhopadhyay. It's a book called How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? And it's about his struggle to articulate himself and the beauty of the sensory world he experiences. You can see on the blurb here, it says, brave, bold, and deeply felt. Deeply felt is important. This book shows that much we might have believed about autism can be wrong. It isn't just that we are worse at living in the neurotypical world. We don't live in the same world. We don't experience the same sensory world. We don't perceive the same perceptions. We don't see the same sights. We don't hear the same sounds. And so he's going to describe a very peculiar world that might be familiar to some of you as I read it here. So this is what he says. This is called the chapter Through the Mirror. And mirrors, by the way, are very important for autistic people. You'll see this a lot, and I've referenced it before. Right now, I am thinking about a mirror. It was a mirror in one of the rooms upstairs in the house where I spent my second and third years of life. The mirror was in front of a window, and it reflected the rocks of those sun-baked hills outside the window. I would stand in front of the mirror, not to admire the landscape and its reflection. I would not stand in front of it to see how well my hair was groomed either, because this is the neurotypical use of a mirror. I would stand in front of it because I believed that the mirror wanted to tell me a story. And I believed that the mirror wanted to tell me a story because I wanted to tell it a story. I would tell my story to the mirror, and the mirror would tell me back the story. I would think about a tilted sky surrounding those climbing goats on the hill. I would believe that the mirror heard my thoughts and would show me the tilted sky. Now, very interesting thing. There is an almost inversion happening here between thinking and sensing. Remember in the Donna Williams video I did before, there's a unique type of autistic consciousness, that's in my blurb, autistic consciousness, called sensing, which is almost basically where you can start to think with the world. The world thinks in you, and the world thinks through sensation, and you realize things by what she calls a kind of unknown knowing. And what does he say here? He says that the world would tell him a story through the mirror, or rather the mirror would tell him a story about the world. That's very interesting. There's a German philosopher and artist and scientist named Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. He's the guy that wrote Faust. And one of the things he said is that my thinking is sensation and my sensation is thinking. That's a type of thinking you can get to where you think in images. What's her name? Temple Grandin thinks in pictures. If you think in pictures, you're going to be a lot more accurate than if you think in abstractions, because abstractions leave things out. This is what Goethe called exact sensorial imagination, where he would kind of a heterodox, a kind of heretical kind of science, he would picture a plant exactly in his imagination, exact sensorial imagination, and he would let the plant tell its story to him in his exact picturing of it. One thing you can do is you can maybe stand in front of a cloud, and like a view of the sky one day, he's viewing the sky, and then view the same sky the next day and do it a few days, but each time take a mental snapshot of it and try to kind of merge the pictures into each other. That's what Goethe did, and he would learn amazing things about the world by letting the world recreate itself in him. And so what he's describing is that the world wanted to tell him a story. There are stories in the world. There is meanings in the world, but in many ways we are cut off from that meaning, or at least neurotypical people are more often so, by our concepts. The concepts stand between us and the world, whereas the world wants to give us its own concepts. But there's a weird way in which, to the extent we become verbal, to the extent we learn to speak and learn to think in words, we're cut off from that. There's been autistic artists, autistic savants, who are able to paint amazing cityscapes by memory, using techniques that artists can't do. They just kind of go like this, they just know exactly what it looks like. But the more verbal these types get, the less they're able to do that, because they start to see abstractions, they start to see icons like on a computer. So let me continue. I was not able to talk when I was 2 or 3 years old. See what I just said? My stories were not meant for human ears. It's almost as if the world is telling itself a story, and we are just on the outside of that storytelling. We don't hear the stories because the world's telling itself, not to us. And maybe we have to be autistic to have non-human ears to hear the story. Human ears cannot hear anything other than sound. Dang. But not my ears, as I believed then, and not the ears of the mirror either. Notice how he's combining sight and sound. It's kind of a synesthesia. I believed that if you cared enough to listen, you could hear the sky and the earth speaking to each other in the language of blue and brown. And I believed that if you cared enough to listen, just listen, you could hear the walls of the room you were in telling the floor not to stare at them, while the floor wondered, where else should I look? A language of white and red. The white of the walls and the red of the painted cement floor. Notice how poetic this is. Isn't it amazing? The mirror heard everything. I knew that the mirror heard everything because only when I stood in front of it could I hear the walls and floor talk. That's interesting. Otherwise, why should I stand in front of it and wait for the open window to sing to the walls of the color and the air? To sing to the walls in the color of the air. Only after I heard the silent voices. Silent voices, a paradox. Could I tell my story to the mirror? It's almost like he depends on a place to be. This is an autistic attitude, is I am not who I am where I am. I exist where I exist, not as I exist. It's not like in the book of Exodus, I am that I am, it's I am where I am. We are combined with our place. We are an organ of the world, and the world feels itself through us, but we don't separate ourselves from it. One day, while I stood in front of it, i.e. the mirror, I realized that it was easy to go through it and come out through it. Now that's really interesting. It's almost like he's merging with these stories. He's merging with the information latent in sensation, because, this is something we don't often think about. What if the sensory world isn't just a sensory world? What if there's information in it? What if meanings aren't just something we project onto the world? What if meanings live in the world? And it takes someone who's not imposing meaning to receive those meanings, to hear those stories. I realized that I could go in or come out only when the world behind me became transparent. Absolutely transparent. And where would all the colors of the world behind me go? I realized that the mirror would absorb all the colors within its own stretch of self. The sun-baked hills would turn browner in it, and I would look behind me to see the real sky and hill. I would be surprised to see them, colored with the color of air. Now this is really interesting. Really, really interesting. If you've ever meditated, like meditated for a long time, I just did, you can get to the place where it's like you hear the sound of silence. You can get to a place where you see the color of air. You can get to a place where the spaces between things have their own substance. You can get to a place where the world itself is revealed as being on a kind of screen, a kind of backdrop, like a movie theater screen that couches everything in itself, that embraces everything, like a movie theater screen embraces the movie. And how could he go in and out through the mirror? How could he access this world of stories when the world became transparent? Maybe that's the point of the mirror, is to show him the stories. Maybe the mirror collects the stories. He says the blue sky behind the window would look bluer in the mirror. And it's almost as if the mirror intensifies the blue. The mirror intensifies the color. And he says this, stories waited for me behind the mirror. So I was needed on its other side, because the stories are waiting for him. He has to get there. Notice the parallels to Through the Looking Glass. He might be doing this deliberately, I suspect not. Through the Looking Glass is, in many ways, the autistic story. You know, it's the story of combining with what's on the other side of perception. Because our eyes are kind of like mirrors, aren't they? You know, how do I put this? It's so hard to explain. But it's like, insofar as we see something, right, we kind of stand back from it. But what happens when we step through that mirror? What happens when we don't just see the thing, but join with the thing that is communing with us through the sight, so to speak? What happens if we step through the looking glass? It says, stories waited for me behind the mirror, so I was needed on its other side. There was no great trouble to go through the mirror to the other side. All I needed to do was to stare intensely at any shadow on the corner of the wall as it was reflected in my eyes. See, it's what I was saying. The eyes are kind of like a mirror. And then here's a poem right at the end of this chapter. Voices of colors and voices of shadows, voices of movement and their echoes, voices of silence spun near or far through spaces and distance, soaking my ears. This boy is brilliant. He's older now. He's probably in his 20s, but just a brilliant, heartfelt, amazing poet and artist who can see the world in the most amazing way. But the cost, of course, is that he's autistic. Severely autistic, non-verbally autistic, what other people might call low functioning, but is this guy low functioning? No, he's not. And, you know, it's kind of like, I like to think of Peter Pan a lot. You know, Peter Pan was the story that really resonated with me as a child in many ways. And I might get into that at some point, but you know, what happens to Peter Pan when he gets to the world? Well, he's disconnected from his shadow. There's another chapter later in the story where he's upset because he can't see his shadow, because the shadow is a guarantee of him. And notice how the mirror is a guarantee of the world. Notice how what he sees in the mirror makes sure the world is there. And in the same way, seeing your shadow lets you know you are there. It's a you that isn't who you are, but where you are. It's like, oh, where am I? There am I, in my shadow. And in a sense, like the mirror, the shadow is something that tells a story of you. The mirror tells the story of the world, and you get this impression. It's so hard to articulate, and I'm grasping to try to articulate this intuition, but you get the impression that the world, when you see in the way he's seeing, is double. Everything is two. Everything is both itself and what's in the mirror. Everything, and to kind of collapse it into one thing, well, that's not really what we should be doing, so to speak. And again, this is so hard to articulate, and I may be making no sense, and I probably am making no sense, but I guess the real message we can learn here is that maybe the ultimate goal is to step through the looking glass, to reunite with our shadow, to step beyond the image of things, to step beyond the world we're cut off from by our concepts and merge with it. To feel it, to be on the other side of the mirror. I hope that made some sense. Maybe it didn't. Maybe there are contradictions in here, and there probably are, but that's okay. I'm Christian Swenson. I do videos here twice a week, usually, and I will see you later. A like, subscribe, comment. I have to say that, apparently. It's part of the... No, it's just stupid. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.